Hey, this is Todd. Happy Easter. I thought I would do a quick video about Rule of Cool since nothing is more Easter-like than Rule of Cool. Rule of Cool is one of those terms that it comes up a lot. You see it in forums, on Reddit and Twitter, social media, all over it. It has a lot of very charged meanings for people. You will see players be angry at their GMs for not embracing Rule of Cool. You will see GMs be shamed for not upholding Rule of Cool. You will see it put as one of the commandments of DMing or GMing, right? The thou shalt not railroad, thou shalt Rule of Cool. But it's really a little bit more complicated than it might seem. Of course, this is going to be very dependent, as usual, on what your table experience is like, what kind of players you have, but it's something that I think has some nuance to it. There are some things that, for myself, when I think of Rule of Cool, some ways I think it can be tamed a little bit or moderated slightly to make it more of something that we can use, because it does have detriments. It's not something that is universally always good, despite what you may hear when you're reading stories or reading internet posts. There are downsides to it potentially downsides with Rule of Cool, but I think there's some things we can do to moderate it so that we can essentially tone down the downsides while keeping up with what I think the benefits are. But first, let's not get ahead of ourselves. When people mention Rule of Cool, you may not really have an idea of what they mean, or you may have half an idea, but basically, and everyone's going to have their own maybe variation on this, but essentially when someone's saying Rule of Cool, what they're saying is that the inventiveness of a solution should be allowed, even if that, or maybe I should put it this way, the inventiveness of an action trumps how legal that action is through a reading of the rules. It sounds kind of legalese. I don't mean it to be. It's really not that complicated. Basically what it is if a player, for example, wants to use an ability, a power, skill in a novel way, the GM should err on the side of allowing it, regardless of whether by a strict reading of the rules it's legal. It might be something like, oh, I can only teleport 5 feet, but if I can teleport 7 feet, I could do this really cool thing, so I'm going to throw it up to my DM. My DM goes, hey, that's really cool. I know it only says 5 feet, but I'm going to give you the 7 feet because that is really cool. That's Rule of Cool, right? The player wants to do something cool, and it usually, I think almost always Rule of Cool, it's sort of inherently, it's either a bending or a breaking of the rules. There may be an ability that says only under certain circumstances can do this, or you should never do that, but it's cool, this situation, so let's go for it. And of course you might think, well, that's awesome. Why wouldn't we do that all the time? And I think you can. I think if you have the right table, you can totally just do it all the time. But what can happen is that something that's done as a one-off, something cool, starts to become, you could call it a crutch, you could call it an expansion of abilities. Let me give you another example. This one has come up on Reddit at least once, maybe multiple times. A caster has Thunder Wave, which already has its own sort of damage and abilities. And the cool idea, hey, I have some marbles or caltrops, or let me throw them up in the air, then I Thunder Wave them, and then in addition to Thunder Wave doing its thing, I've essentially released a shotgun blast of these small projectiles, and it does extra damage, whatever it comes out with. Now it seems, yeah, that's cool, right? Well, if a careful reading of Thunder Wave, I'm going from memory, so be gentle, internet. A careful reading of Thunder Wave will say that it doesn't really do much to obstacles in its path. It does not give it. It is not a concussive blast of the type that would send caltrops or marbles or whatever as a sort of shotgun blast. But right, the GM is like, man, that's cool. I know it's not exactly what Thunder Wave does, but I'm gonna give it to you because that's really cool. So boom, it happens. And you think that's great, right? Everyone feels good. The player feels like they came up with an inventive solution to a problem. Potentially, maybe there are a lot of enemies clogging up a space, and this allowed them to clear it out, or just they needed extra damage, whatever it is. Hey, it was an inventive solution to a problem. Bam. Well, okay, fast forward a week, they get back to town. now this player's character is going everywhere around town, buying up all the marbles they can carry. And now every encounter afterwards, he's tossing marbles, Thunderwave, tossing marbles, Thunderwave, rinse and repeat. So it's not cool anymore. And now all that's happened in reality is you had this one moment of cool, but now you have this expansion of what Thunderwave is. Because now Thunderwave has essentially set a new bar. It used to be the way it was, say, rules as written in the book. Now it's this other thing. And the players doing what players, I think, often do, and I know I've seen this myself, is you get, you take an ability, you say, oh, can I do this with it? And then you use that as a ladder. Okay, now I can do this. Can I do this? Again, now can I take it a step further? Can I take it a step further? And that can be fine, and I think in some ways it's expected that you're trying to leverage your abilities, but when you're pushing them kind of outside or above and beyond the bounds which which were written into them, you get a power creep situation. You get something where now you've got an exploit. It went from rule of cool, I did it once and it was great, but now I'm just starting to rely on it. I'm just starting to pull it out, and maybe I'm doing something, even trying to build on top of it. Okay, well, I did it with pellets. Why don't I try to make little arrowheads, kind of pseudo bullets? And because they're pointy ended as opposed to round like the marbles were, maybe I can get some even more on top of it. Maybe I can do this on top of it, right? So it can get A can get unbalanced, B can get a little bit ridiculous, and if you stop it, if you say, okay, no, we're not doing this Thunderwave marbles thing, it's easy to feel like the bad guy, and it's easy for people on the internet to paint you as the bad guy. No, dude, you should have done it. Oh, you should have done something else. You should have just beefed up all the enemies so they could take Thunderwaves and not taking this away from the players, or whatever they'll say. So what do we do in these situations, right? We want to encourage people to be inventive. We want them to look at their abilities. I want someone to take Thunderwave and look at it, and not just look at it and say, okay, this is this basic thing that it does. I want them to look in terms of, what more can I do with it? How can I do something interesting with this and different? At the same time, if I'm going to break a rule for rule of cool, the Thunderwave in the spell description says, hey, this is not going to push stuff like bullets or anything like that. It's just not. That's just not the way it works, and I'm going to allow it. How can I allow it and be cool and fulfill this player's idea, but also not go down a sort of a rabbit hole, downward spiral of now suddenly this is just the only move they use in the game? How do I find that balance? The one thing I came up with, because really the thing is, the rule of cool is it's not really a mechanic. It's just this kind of guide. So there's nothing in the rules. There's no mechanic in D&D around rule of cool. And I guess ultimately what I'm trying to suggest here with this is to create some kind of mechanic to tie it into the game. And that way it can be regulated somewhat. Because we want people to try to do cool things. We want people to strive for this rule of cool thing, but we don't want it to A, become something where they're dependent on it, B, turn it into something where it's cool at first and then it just becomes just sort of a rinse and repeat new routine that's just overpowered or more powerful than was before. If you're just going to cast Thunderwave every round, now you've got Thunderwave Plus. It just makes other things less meaningful, because now the next spell they get, if it's not as good as Thunderwave Plus, well, they're just going to back down to Thunderwave Plus. So what happens to the rest of their advancement? It can really throw a lot of things out of whack. And you're in a group of multiple players. If it's just me and one other player, yes, I could make all enemies start to kind of figure out Thunderwave Plus, or give them more hit points, or raise their armor class, or give them better saves. But what is that? But that's just me responding to this one player. What do I do with the other players? Because they don't have Thunderwave Plus. So if I raise the armor class, if I give more hit points, if I raise their saving throws, well, that affects the other guys who are running the stuff that they're at the level kind of they're supposed to, or they're given their level, and their stuff's just going to be less effective. It ends up being sort of a downward spiral. Yes, I'm playing up to this one player, and everyone else is just made more difficult. Can that work? Sure. Is it maybe the ideal solution? Maybe not. So what might an ideal solution look like? Well, I would say is, we want rule of cool to be there, so let's try to integrate it in the rules. Now, we don't want to tie down what rule of cool is. You don't want to get into a thing of like, okay, I'll allow you rule of cool, but now we're gonna have to establish what is rule of cool exactly, and let's have a mock debate or a trial where we will assess anything and say, it's not really cool enough, so it doesn't qualify. I don't want that to be the case. At the same time, I don't want it to be where people are chasing that all the time, or they're just constantly trying to push something beyond where it should be, and then getting upset if as a GM you're not accepting every time they do that, right? So let's figure out a way to kind of keep that balance. The one way that I came up with, and it's certainly not perfect, and when you watch this, feel free to put in the comments or reach out to me on Twitter or anywhere else I am, Reddit, about what you might think. But my personal favored mechanic to tie it to was inspiration. And on some ways you can go, well, that's kind of weak sauce because inspiration is not very much supported at all. So I'm tying something that's non-supported, something that's very weakly supported. This is true, but hear me out. So we have inspiration. Now, there is inspiration. If you're not familiar with it, it is an optional rule whereby when you do something amazing, interesting, whatever it is, the DM can go, oh, yeah, that was great. Here's inspiration for you. You can only have one at a time. And this is where I think it's important for Rule of Cool. You can only have one at a time, and you can spend it when you want to. Spend it when you want to, and I think for what now it's like you can get advantage. I think maybe it gives you advantage on a roll. I mean, different people may do different things with it. I think by the book, and maybe you get advantage on the roll. So something's happening, you really want to see today. I had inspiration. Okay, there's advantage. So now here we're giving a second use to inspiration. So you could use it to get advantage on a roll, or you could use it on a Rule of Cool thing. So now, in essence, it doesn't. So now we get a couple things out of this exchange. If we're following the rules of inspiration, you only can have one at any given time, which means that generally, and of course there might be some variance, and you can play with this, right? You're only going to be able to do one Rule of Cool thing in a session, more or less. If you play where you can roll over inspiration from session to session, maybe you use it at the beginning of a session and you get lucky and you have another inspiration by the end of the session. Probably uncommon. I don't know. It could really be up to you how often you want inspiration to come to play. So now we have a natural limit. If I want to do Thunderwave Plus, at most I'm going to get it once a session. So if I want that to be my thing, I'm going to carry around a bag of marbles wherever I go, and I'm going to leash it. I'm only doing it one time. So that already gives me, as a GM, kind of a bit of a sigh of relief. Because whatever Thunderwave Plus does, and however I feel like, I don't want to give it to them because it's too much or I don't like it, I can just think about, you know what, they're just going to use it once a session. And if it's a boss fight or something else, I can kind of figure it out. I think it's much less of a deal if I say, okay, they're going to get one overpowered thing they're going to do. And of course, they may want to use it for something else. Now you have the sort of economics that you have at your disposal, because now it's like, well, maybe I need advantage of something else, like a death save, like something else is important. So now I don't want to just blindly chuck my inspiration at Thunderwave Plus every session, assuming I get inspiration every session. I got to figure out what I want to do with that. And you could even give inspiration some other effects. So now you have this competing ideas of what to do with inspiration. Ooh, do I spend it on a Rule of Cool thing? I got this cool idea coming up, and it's kind of bending the rules, so it's definitely going to be in that Rule of Cool area. I want to hold on to my inspiration for that, but I can also use it for advantage. Something else, maybe there's even another thing that we've given inspiration to. You got choices. You got some things where, which is, as a player, as a GM, that's what I like. I want players to have choices and costs. Now, trying to invoke Rule of Cool isn't just this freebie that as a GM, if you don't give away to your players, that somehow you're playing wrong. Now it's up to the players to decide. You've got this currency. Here's something you can spend it on or not. Save it, spend it. Maybe you need it for something else. You got choices. I like that. You have a new opportunity, kind of action you can do. Has a cost associated with it. Of course, as I mentioned before, inspiration is very imperfect in the sense that it is also not mechanically based. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you've probably seen I have said things like, I really am not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of mechanics or rules that really rely on pleasing the GM or having to figure out what the GM wants. And it's really my whole problem with milestones is that it's kind of like, you will level up when I say so. I don't like that. I want to know as a player, I want to have the option of how can I level up, and I'll figure out how to do it. Not, I got to follow, I have to figure out, what does the GM want me to do to level up, and let me do that. That's not the kind of relationship I want. And inspiration definitely falls into that category of, it's interesting, but it's kind of the please the GM rule. And like as tables, I think I've seen different tables have come up with different things to do with inspiration. And I think I remember watching one of Matt Colville's Running the Game episodes. And he talked about in his game, he would give you inspiration if you kind of figured something out. There was a little mystery, some enigmatic element in the game. You made progress on discovering something, and you kind of had an aha moment of a piece of knowledge, and that was kind of his rule to give you inspiration. You can figure out yourself. What I like about the Matt Colville example, one of the things is that essentially, even though it is still kind of in the GM's court to sort of deliver, at least there is a requirement that everybody can see. I know as a player, if I'm playing in that game, I know if I figure something out about the world, I'll get inspiration. I can kind of visualize that and I can make a go at it. Whereas if it's just, I got to be funny, and funny to whom, I got to do something amazing, but amazing to whom? Like the judgment, you have to figure out, you're all about trying to figure out some evasive element of, I have to please somebody, I have to make somebody laugh, I have to do something like that. Something like, hey, figuring out knowledge about the world. Maybe I had a video on this, I talked about, and I had a little supplement that I put out, a little one-pager about faults and flaws and things like that. I'll link to the video. Maybe I'll get one of the little things to pop up if I can remember. And in that video, I mentioned that coming up with ways to generate inspiration because I liked it and to do things, but to have it in a way that was more, say, along the lines of this, more something that is more transparent to me as a player. How do I get it? Then what can I spend it on? So if that one was about kind of how can I get it, this one, and I think I even mentioned in that one about spending it on Rule of Cool, this one is about spending it. So you have to make that bridge about how am I going to make inspiration achievable? Because if you're going to tie Rule of Cool to inspiration, it doesn't really do any good if A, the players don't know how to get inspiration, or B, they can never get it, or some combination of it where it's so opaque when you get it or not, it just ends up becoming either they'll never have it or they will never know how they can get it, right? So you want to make it something that they can plan on. So if you're going to use inspiration, and I'm suggesting you give it a try, just come up with some way of making it, of mechanizing it. It could be something that you go, hey, you have these character goals. If you're in a game that really goes into backstories and really brings that into your games, then maybe you tie it into fulfilling kind of backstory type goals or character goals. You could ask each character, hey, what are you working on? And then each time they accomplish a step of that or something, then you could say, okay, here's some inspiration. And everything really should always be a conversation between the players and GM. So it's one of those things you go, okay, hey, you want to find your long lost sister. Okay, what do you feel like the steps are to finding your long lost sister? Okay, well, I need to go to the town where you grew up and ask some people stuff. Then I need to take that information and I need to track down my uncle, because I know last year was with the uncle, and then whatever. So maybe you say, okay, when you figure out this thing from the town, or you figure out where the uncle is, then that's an inspiration bit. So you do your stuff, and we're going to be adventuring, but when you get that uncle part, that's your inspiration. And you can say, hey, about the main, once they pick up kind of a quest, okay, you guys are going off to get the princess. When you get the princess, that's inspiration. I mean, you could kind of hand it out on a milestone basis. I would just suggest if you're going to do it with a milestone, it has to be clear up front. I just think that the players have something to chase. I think more often than being part of milestones, because it'll be very regular, and then if you don't get them kind of when you milestone, you'll kind of have one per level. It's probably not enough. We want to make it smaller things. I liked it with the flaws and quirks and characters because it gives the players a chance to really delve into their characters, kind of play it up a little bit and get rewarded for it. And the way I wrote it up in that supplement was essentially that you had to take the negative side. It wasn't about playing it up when it's convenient for you. It was about playing it up when it's inconvenient. So, for example, if you'd say, hey, I'm just going to be very stereotypical here, I'm playing a dwarf cleric who's greedy. You say, okay, you can't play up your greed for inspiration when either it's purely RP, it has no influence on anything, or it actually works to your favor, as being great. But when you get to it, when, for example, you have to hand over this jewel that you got back to the Lord for whom you found it, and you find you can't let go of it. Now greed is harming you, it's putting you in trouble, that's when you get inspiration. That's kind of how I was structuring it. But once you have those things in place, when you say, okay, we've got currency, I'm saying inspiration. And one of the other reasons I chose inspiration is other things they can just, you don't want to inconvenience or put a burden on one class more than another. Everybody has equal opportunity. However you decide to hand out inspiration, every class, every race, every combination has equal opportunity to get it. It doesn't affect one race more than another. If I said, okay, you got to spend, I don't know, spell slots for inspiration, then suddenly some people go, well, I don't have spell slots, or that's unfair to me because my whole character is based around spell slots and I don't want to trade it for this other thing, or whatever, right? Or I based it off, okay, how you can do this has to do with your hit point totals. Well, now the martial classes have many more hit points, so that's better. Or now this they don't. Or if I said, okay, it's based on your wisdom or your constitution, right? Any stat you choose, anything you choose that's kind of part of classes, you're obviously going to have winners and losers, people who are just because of the way their characters are built have more of this, have less than the other, something of that nature. But inspiration is totally independent of any of that stuff. Inspiration doesn't care about what level you are, how high your stats are, what your species, what your class is. It doesn't care. And that's kind of in this sense, the beauty of it. It's totally independent. It's just this little currency, very independent, but it has the right amount, for me, of frequency, which is you're going to generally have one at any given time, which means you can't spam Rule of Cool. And number two, you can tie it into things that are either character-based, they can be objective-based, it could be like XP, you could roll for them randomly. Hey, at the end of the encounter, we're going to roll somebody at the table and they're going to get inspiration if they don't have one already. Or maybe do it this way. Hey, after every short rest, everybody roll a die. If you rolled a 6 and you didn't have inspiration, you have inspiration now. Even that works. Anything works, because it's really just, over time, all those things will fairly even out, however you want to do it. And everybody has essentially equal opportunity. The idea is that you limit the number of Rule of Cools you can do. So you say, okay, you can't spam it. You limit the number. And now because they're spending a currency to do it, me as a GM, I don't have to think all that hard about it. I could say, if it's really insane, I want to use this spell to pull the moon into the planet, I can go, okay, that's... The idea is you don't spend this currency and now you're a god for 90 seconds or whatever it is, or however long it takes to do this. But I don't have to think about it. Because one of the things that can come up, and maybe you've seen this when you're playing, or as a player, as a GM, maybe you haven't, but I've certainly been there, definitely as a GM, and I've seen as a player where, as I mentioned before, players will kind of step that kind of, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile kind of thing. That's a real thing, and I think that scares a lot of people. I am very wary about things that just power boost players without cost, because I've seen it come up. Oh, you'll allow me this foot? Okay, let me take this other foot. Oh, okay, now I can get here. Oh, now I'm going to try to get here. And it could be burdensome on the GM. And what you end up doing as a GM is when someone has a request, whether it's good nature or not, you're looking at through that lens of, are they trying to get this as step one to just blowing apart any kind of balance or any kind of semblance of anything, right? If I say, okay, sure, we're gonna give you this extra bit. Are they going to stop there, or are they going to then turn that, and then next week they're taking that extra bit and now they're trying to push even more? But if I know that they can only do it once a game, I'm not as concerned about that. I'm not really setting precedents, because they're going to have that currency to spend. It can't be, oh, I'm just doing this now. Okay, you only got one, so spend your one and do it. And I'm not setting up new normals, because we're saying that this is a breaking of the rules. When you spend an inspiration and you invoke Rule of Cool, you're not creating a new rule. We're not creating a house rule for Thunderwave. This is a special, one-time only Thunderwave that does shotgun damage with marbles. You're literally, as if like a gift from the gods, from the lords of chaos, whomever it is, that's what is represented there. It is a momentary breaking of the weave of the universe to make the spell happen in a unique or interesting way. And every time you spend it, you get that. But we are not remaking the rules. It is not, when it's over, Thunderwave goes back to normal. It is not the new way Thunderwave works. So once we have that relationship, once we've let everybody know, right, we're being transparent, we're having conversations, we're letting everybody know. When you set Rule of Cool, you say, I want to spend my inspiration, I want to invoke Rule of Cool to do this. It is a temporary thing. It is not a new normal. And I probably should have said that earlier because it may be the most important thing about this whole grand design that I'm giving to you, that I'm laying out here for you, is that by, as a player, making it something that they are invoking in themselves. I am spending inspiration to invoke Rule of Cool, to do this. We are saying that this is outside the normal bounds. Whatever, is like that kind of, it's that bit in the Matrix where Morpheus says some rules can be bent, some can be broken, but only in that instant when you're handing over the inspiration to do that. Inspiration, that hero point, that little bit of extra magic from beyond. That's what allows these things, the rules of the universe, the weave, the fabric to just stretch a little bit, to bend temporarily. Snaps open. Hey, Thunderwave Plus comes in. They snapshot the next Thunderwave you do. If you don't have inspiration, it's just regular Thunderwave. I think that'll make everybody happy, because I think for the most part, as a player, you come up with something cool, you just want it to work, right? If you're not out to try to bend and break the rules for your own quasi-permanent gain in the game, you're just looking at like, wow, this is a great idea, I just want to see it come up. And yeah, there is that disappointment when you think, oh, I got this cool idea, and the GM shoots it down, even if the GM has perfectly good reasons to shoot it down. And as a GM, it feels bad when you see something, their face is lit up and they're like, oh, I got this great thing. And then you say, nah, sorry, because X, Y, and Z. Or look at the book, it says, Thunderwave doesn't push objects, so sorry, no shotgun pellets. And you see them kind of deflate. And it's tough as a GM, because you don't want players to have that feeling. You don't want them to feel like you just shut them down, right? This way, I think it maybe doesn't make everyone super happy, because obviously if someone's out there and they want to push the rules around, this is going to limit them. But I think for the most part, I think players are going to look at that and say, hey, I have an avenue to get Rule of Cool once a session if I can get inspiration, which gives me a currency, and if I know how to get that currency, and I talked about some different ways you can rig it up, but if I know I can get it, and then I have something interesting to spend it on, and it may not be the only thing, because we might still use it for advantage, then I have choices with consequences. I really want advantage on that roll, but if I use my advantage now, then I won't have a Rule of Cool I can drop in there if I need it. But if I use a Rule of Cool, I may need that advantage down the line. Ooh, that's a choice. Those are the kind of choices I like. But ultimately, I wanted to throw this out there as a way to say, hey, I see Rule of Cool pointed out all the time. It is fun to have. I think it can be abused. I think it can get to be too much. Everyone's got their own table. You may have players that will never abuse it, and you can just run it as it is. It's great. Otherwise, other times you can be at a con game, and all you see are opportunistic players that come in. All they want to do is try to break this little game. It's the way they have fun. So they're going to say, oh, if I can get here, I can get here. This kind of just finds a middle ground, right? It saves you from any kind of abuse, I think. If there's a loophole that somebody can find, please let me know. But I think it sort of takes away the abuse angle. What remains is the ability for players to call upon Rule of Cool. And I think in a way it's in their benefit, because they can decide when to do it. It's up to them to say, hey, I want to make Rule of Cool. It's not up to me as a GM to say, ooh, that's a cool idea. It's really up to the player to say, I want to bend the fabric of our reality for a moment to make this happen. And we go, great. So it puts it, I think, in some ways more in their control, but with limits. I don't know. I look at that as kind of win-win for everybody. So, hey, Rule of Cool, make it work for you. Let me know if you think that inspiration idea works. Obviously, there is a little work you have to do with that, because it's not just, hey, tied to inspiration, you're done. You got to figure out what to do with inspiration. However, that said, Rule of Cool, I think that's a pretty good way to use it. Let me know if you do. Hey, if you like these videos before I go, give it a thumbs up, subscribe. Helps me a lot. I'm working my way, trying to figure things out, and it really does help when folks support the channel in that way. I have a Patreon if you want to support the channel in a different way. I've got that. I've also got a Ko-Fi, which is kind of like Patreon, which is kind of a one-time, you buy someone a coffee. I don't know why I call it Ko-Fi, because it's spelled Ko-Fi, but I think it's coffee. If you want to do it that way, it's kind of like, hey, here's a one-time sort of a tip. If you want to do that, I'm not above getting a tip if you feel like this was worth it. So that's also linked in the show notes. But please, everybody, I know we're in the middle of the coronavirus here. I'm filming this in my mother-in-law's empty apartment, which is just right upstairs from us. She's off doing other things, and she's been nice enough to let me use it. So I've got a little bit of a private space, though. It's a bit spare, and I'm not in my comfort area, but I'm doing what I can. But please stay safe. Game on, and I'll talk to you later.
Next.